here today, you know, with regards to your particular situation, because, everything is fact specific. Um, but to jump into things, I'm going to talk a little bit about how, the foundational issues that happen early on in the startup process can really cripple fundraising. Initial seeds, initial series, and kind of as they evolve down the road. Anything you want to chime in
Yeah,
with?
I would. And this is, and it kind of saddens me to see, again, the enthusiasm I see from a lot of these CEOs and founders when they come out into market, they know they've solved a critical problem in the marketplace, and they think that other people should invest in them or support them in some sort of resource or capital intensive way. What they don't understand is some basic things that they may have done wrong early on will taint that. A lot of times you only get one chance at speaking to these investors and these partners. And if you come forward on the wrong foot, that could taint you not only there, but they communicate amongst themselves as well. So the more prepared you are walking into this, the better you're going to be. And again, thank you, Anna, for putting this deck together.
Yeah, no, I mean 100%. I mean, I'd say in this world, first impressions matter so much. And it's not just, sort of those things that people usually think about that drive first impressions, the charisma of the founder or the potential impact of the product. It also has to do with, whether your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, whether you look like, you're a serious player in this field. And we'll talk through, some of those first impressions. When Andrew and I sat down to come up with this topic, something that came to mind was this restaurant that's down the street from my house. And I was chatting through this, and as I kind of thought through this analogy, it was like different components of the analogy kept building. Oh yeah, that's, the reason why this restaurant failed. That, has so much to do with why startups tend to fail. But there was this restaurant that was formed started about 2 years ago down the street from my house. And as soon as the sign went up, I turned to my family and I said, "This is not going to work. Sadly, I do not see this restaurant being here in a few years from now." And that has come to pass. The restaurant just closed its doors a few days ago, but there were so many lessons taken from that experience that I really feel like applied to the startup world. So we're going to kind of use that as an analogy, as a metaphor for this conversation. So bear with some of the silliness, but I think it will be helpful for kind of visualizing what the expectations of investors are and sort of how to anticipate them.
Yeah, and as to that point, I mean, if you want to advance the slide there, as to that point, I have seen, or I often work with chief science officers and folks rolling out of academia. And the conversations, the tone, the listening ability, all those things matter in an investment world, but they're not transferable. If you start talking over investors or say, I've got that covered in my 15th slide, just we're on slide three, I know, just hang out and wait. That's not what they want to hear. And even though they won't say something to your face, that's going to be a black ball against you getting any further with that organization. So, and back to what you said, those first impressions, and sometimes it's not anything that you've done necessarily wrong in the environment you're in, but you understand the environment you're going into.
100%, 100%. And I think we kind of have that mentality when we look at like a restaurant that we might want to go into, right? So, we think through, okay, what does this facade look like? In the example of the restaurant that I was thinking about, there was this, it was really tacky. It kind of looked grimy from the first day it was built. And those, same patterns tend to translate within the startup world, right? If the first impression that you have for those investors, whether it's in that initial conversation that you mentioned, Andrew, or it's in the pitch deck that you're sending along, or it's in your website, as we'll get into in just a minute, if those, you're not setting the right tone from that first interaction with the company, then you're set up for some challenges. Um, so as I said, that website is so often the first point of contact that an investor has with a company. They're told about this amazing new company, check it out, they Google the website, something pops up, and there may be some really strong content on there, but if there's key elements that are missing that just show that the company isn't really paying attention to what it needs to be paying attention to from an administrative perspective, from a legal perspective, from a governance perspective, a compliance perspective, that can really degrade trust before the relationship's even been built, before there's even a conversation between that investor and the company. So investors are going to go on that website. They'll see if there's a privacy policy. They'll see if there's terms of use. They'll see if there's claims that are made about the company or about the product that can't be substantiated. Um, I mean, I've seen so many situations, and if you're doing it out there, don't worry, you're not alone. But where people will cut and paste the privacy policy from a different company and insert it, it's clear that the factors that apply to that other company's privacy policy don't apply here. The facts and circumstances aren't the same. And it really, makes investors question. It makes any stakeholders question, are these people serious? Are they, really thinking through their compliance risks, their governance risks, thoughtfully? And are they seeking, the counsel of experts who are kind of gonna guide them in the right direction when they need to be? Um, and so, that's really something that I often, when I'm, looking at a business that I'm interested in engaging with, we'll take a look at that privacy policy. We'll take a look at those terms and conditions, and that kind of sets the tone for my interest in engaging with them.
And Anna, if I could add on this one, that was something that was a little bit of a blind spot for me. And when people come to me, they're looking most likely to raise capital for something that's unique or novel coming into the marketplace. And then I'll assess the science. I'll meet with the leadership team. I'll just think about, is this something that I want to expend my personal capital on and bring into my networks and make those introductions? Once Anna mentioned to me, hey, have you looked at the privacy statement or the legal terms that are on their website? And if I click on that link and there is nothing there, or if there's something there that makes no sense to me at all, now I'm a little bit worried because I'm introducing risk and liability into my personal network by bringing these folks in there. It sounds so basic, but now that's a big red flag for me. And I appreciate Anna, you putting that on my radar screen because I was this many years old before I realized it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's so true. Like all of these things are, at their core social, interactions, right? I mean, if you are bringing somebody to the people who you trust and value, you want to make sure that the company that you're standing behind is trusted and valued as well. And so that really gets at the core of the challenge for startups when they're trying to make these connections, trying to build up a name in the field. If they're not putting their best foot forward with their website, they can be kicking themselves in the butt. Um, so another challenge that I often see come up is what I'm going to call the menu dilemma. So, with the example of this restaurant, that opened up in my town, the menu was just all over the place. So there was this giant sign outside. It said pizza, Mexican food, sushi. It was like, the entire kitchen sink. And it was clear from the get-go, it's not possible to have an effective restaurant. You can't manage all of these kinds of cuisine and do it successfully. And it really just, put a bad taste in your mouth, both kind of literally and figuratively. Um, and the same and that kind of confusion and that kind of chaotic approach to product development really applies in the startup world too. I know, Andrew, you've got a lot of thoughts about this and shiny object syndrome and how, I know you've worked with people who are kind of trying to do a little bit too much too fast.
I do. And I just read one of the comments there. So apologies for anyone that may have heard me swear at the beginning of this talk, but that part was not recorded. So you have to live it in the moment. But yeah, shiny object syndrome. And this is, again, I don't want to cast aspersions upon folks coming out of an academic or research institution. I am so excited about what you've done and what you've solved. And I know that this thing that you have, this product is the most beautiful child you've ever brought into this planet. And this child will be that superhuman or super thing that will fix so many different problems that are out there. That's wonderful. But which one of those things is going to pay us first, is the fastest to market, and doesn't have the competitive headwinds that some other sectors might have? These are a lot of questions that oftentimes the folks that are running these organizations haven't thought of, because in an academic institution, you're incentivized by getting citations and research documents, by getting patents, by doing discoveries, by bringing grants in to pay for these types of things. When you move into the commercial world and scaling and industrial, it is a completely different environment. You need to be hyper focused on those things that will get you to market fastest, bring revenue in fastest, and make your investors, your partners happiest, quickest. So, Anna, this is a crucial piece there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the more the better is not always the solution. So, I mean, this also translates, I find in my world, to cap table management and data room management. I've seen so many situations where a cap table hasn't been consistently managed, a data room hasn't been consistently managed. You've got that menu dynamic going all over the place. You've got some equity allocated here and some equity allocated there, and this board role, and is this person, a director, or are they a board observer, and what exactly is their role in the organization? There's a lot going on, and there's not a lot of clarity. And this can lead to a lot of confusion, kind of on the superficial level of just, a lack of awareness of kind of who owns equity, what kind of equity, what are the vesting, provisions attached to that equity, early on. But it can also be, have a really dramatic impact on an organization down the road. When you don't have this kind of clarity, when you have a messy cap table, when you have a messy data room, when things aren't being properly documented, or even they're not being properly adopted, right? There's not clarity on whether this person was in fact admitted onto the board. It can lead to really messy legal situations, right? I mean, we've seen suits where down the road, once things become valuable and there's a lot at stake, people are more interested in questioning how decisions were made initially, and what the company claims from a capitalization perspective or a governance perspective is consistent with what their documents say. Um, and, from an investor perspective, anxiety about these future legal situations can complicate things. It can lead to some prolonged negotiations. There can be some uncertainty about what the existing equity is, and who's involved in the organization. And I've seen, this kind of friction close deals. It can be really problematic.
And Anna, I would like to add, and for those of you who are listening and will listen in the future, when you have this great idea to start a company, and that childhood friend of yours who was there when you had your first beer and experienced all these things, that is your natural partner. And you decide to go 50-50 with this person who might not have any understanding of what your industry does, but you trust them, and that's that person. As that business matures, like Anna is saying, and revenue starts flowing in there, let's say that person doesn't want to be there anymore. Let's say that something, God forbid, happens to them and now their family inherits those shares and now they're your partner. And if you've got a 50-50, that's a logjam that Anna I've seen almost insurmountably to break through. But in it, and I'm not just saying this as a random example. I've seen it over and over and over again that there's a trusted friend that's brought onto the cap table, or I've also seen people accept a check from an investor and not really look at those terms and find out that they've allowed someone on the cap table that now can vote down anyone else coming in there without certain exclusionary parameters around it. And does that cap table then mean they have a board seat? There's a lot more there that causes distress. I have seen some of the messiest cap tables in the world. And again, a lot of these folks are rolling out of academia, so the academic institution is sitting on the cap table, or a part of that academic institution is sitting on the cap table. And how do you then bring that to the larger investment community? So this is, I know it sounds like we're going through numbers and boxes and stuff like that, but this is one of those things that as an investor, they're going to flip right over to this page, either first or second, and take a look at it.
Yeah, 100%. And, I mean, sometimes I find those kinds of situations where there's, these long-term friendships, long-term business partnerships can be the most complicated because there's, a lot of emotion there. There's a lot of, personal connection there. Um, and I always advise clients, try to lean on the resources that are available to you. It's not up to you to navigate it all alone, right? There's some incredible, um, cap table management systems out there that can really, highlight the terms, that can keep everything in one place, that can, help you understand what the long-term impacts of different provisions within, agreements are going to be. Lean in on advisors. I often play like, bad cop. I often jump into these situations and say, all right, let's, figure out how to resolve this dispute. But lean in on your partners, lean in on your technology to address some of these issues as
Well,
well.
and lean on your counsel. I think you brought up a good point there at the end there. You get brought into these conversations. The whole reason you became a lawyer is you saw a lawyer resolve a very, very complicated situation, said, "Hey, I can do that for others as well." So, this is one of those times when it's really good to lean on that counsel.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Another thing that I see a lot is, a lack of team investment. In this restaurant metaphor, the restaurant down the street. Every time I passed by this restaurant, the staff was there on their phone, disengaged. We actually went into the restaurant one time. My kids were like, we have to go check it out. It's got this big play thing set up. So we went along with it and like walked in immediately. The server was on their phone, disengaged. Um, and when you have disengaged staff, you have disengaged patrons, you have disengaged customers. People aren't going to want to get involved in a company that, those who are closest to it aren't involved in deeply. And they're not going to be the staff's disengaged, they're not going to be creating the best experience for the patrons or the customers. Um, and
And
I
if you
see,
can go back to that one again, and
yeah.
also I just want to throw in here two things. One, Nevada King, thank you for the shout out. I appreciate that. Nevada King, a cell culture expert. But the one of the things I deal with too are what are the threats to the organization? And insider threats are huge. If you have a team that doesn't feel they're part of whatever show this is, but their leverage is they know some inside information. Typically, these companies are young and fragile. Any kind of hit to the broadside is going to take them down. And if that employee then becomes disenchanted with the operation for whatever purpose, whether it's lack of equity, lack of pay, just not treating them correctly, they can then use that, whatever inside information is, as leverage and bring that to a competitor. So the more you look at your team and make them part of this, the better off you're going to be. Back to the restaurant analogy, I went to a new restaurant recently and had just a spectacular meal. Who would have thought that chicken Caesar salad and grit cakes would taste that good? I was amazed, just really at the care and quality and really the mouthfeel and all the rest of the stuff. When I spoke to the owner, I said, you better take care of that chef. I said, I don't care how good your service team is. If you're not putting food down to this higher quality out, you're not going to last long. And he said, you know what? I recognize that. And I told the chef, if he's here in 2 years, he has part ownership of this restaurant. So just really bringing the staff in, bringing the team into the organization, let them buy into that greater mission, is going to go a long way. But Anna, thanks for bringing this point up.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and what that owner said, it rings so true. I mean, the staff need to feel like they have a stake in the long-term future of the business. And that comes from a combination of factors, right? It comes from the culture, it comes from the relationships, it also comes from what goes down on paper. I mean, to turn to the next slide, there's so many important ways to bring your staff in, to get them on that cap table, to get them to develop vesting arrangements where they have to be with the company in the long term in order to fully realize their equity. Um, is and giving them a voice at the table is so important. And then on the other side, making sure, as you said before, that there's not a risk of them walking or a significant risk of them walking away with vital information, vital intellectual property, and taking it to the next place. Making sure that you have um, intellectual property assignment agreements in place, making sure that you have confidential information agreements in place, making sure that you do also have some stick when it's needed to keep that information internal within the company. And to make it clear that everyone's on the same page here, that everybody, the information that they're developing is to serve the best interests of the company, and holding them to that. I often see in situations as well that there's not written employment agreements or contractor agreements, right? And that can be really problematic kind of on two levels. Again, you just don't have the terms there. There's not clarity about maybe what the compensation mechanism is, or clarity about, what the reporting hierarchy is, or what service expectations there are. But also just kind of on the emotional, from an emotional perspective, that people don't feel invested in a company if they don't have a piece of paper in their hand, that really shows that they're there for the long term, that there's a formality to the arrangement. And so that's really important to incorporate too.
And one of the things too, I often see folks come to me with a portfolio of IP, of the patents they have, and licensing agreements they have, trade secrets, and all. And I ask the first question I ask is, have you defended this in court? Is this, and oftentimes they say, no, no, we have a patent. Well, your patent's only as good as your defense of that patent. And a lot of different international courts treat intellectual property differently than we do here in the United States. That's a critical piece. And then one example, which kind of pained me when I heard this, and this is someone that Ann and I had both spoken to. We asked about the IP, and they said, "Well, we've licensed it, and we have the geographic the ability to lock out in this geographic region." And I said, "Well, what if the licensee goes to the main competitor and sells it to them?" And they said, "Well, he wouldn't, or they wouldn't do that." So, well, as an investor, I'm like, ooh, first of all, you don't own the IP. You get a limited scope geographic license for this, and the person that holds the IP, you're trusting their whims are good. So there's a lot of, trust is an important thing, but document it.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I find like as a general rule, people think that their IP portfolio is more robust than it is, that, they haven't poked the necessary holes in it that need to be poked. And made sure that they're securing everything. I mean, it reminds me of someone else that we chatted with who, had maintained ownership of all of the IP. And an investor comes to the table and says, all right, I want to put money into this company. Well, what are they getting out of that? Because if the IP isn't an asset of the company, then the equity owner is not, holding on to any of that IP, and that really limits their holdings. So,
That's an
it's
important point. I mean, that really should be underlined.
yeah. And kind of on a similar note, the investment of the owner really matters. I mean, I've seen situations where the owners don't seem that invested in the idea themselves. And this sometimes comes up in funny ways. You can have somebody who's super energetic and engaged in their product, and really talks about it affectionately. You made like the child analogy before. It's like it's really their baby. But if they're not, showing up to the table and doing the necessary work that they need to do to maintain it, then they're really not invested in it. So if they're not, being thoughtful about what governance practices they have in place, who is governing the organization, if they're not making decisions in accordance with their bylaws and getting things appropriately documented, if they don't have, again, their cap table well substantiated, they're really just not taking the care that they need for that company. It's like a chef who, isn't, things are falling apart and they're not putting in the investment to fix them up. There's holes in the foundation and those aren't getting addressed. There's bad food reviews and the chef isn't, there's no change in the chef or adjustment in the chef's approach. So That can be, even beyond the staff investment, the owner investment can be a real red flag to investors that something's not right, that this isn't a company that's really going to be sustainable.
And sometimes what I see are people that have successful exits from different verticals, and they decide to go into a new vertical. I've been working in tech my whole life, but food is important to me. I think I can replicate the success I had with a software package with a food product, and it's a completely different world. And I think that it can be overwhelming. The amount of learning that has to be done, the amount of regulatory procedures that need to be followed, all the things that go with that, and that can that can burn out a new owner or new founder quickly. And then the other piece that I want to mention too is, and I can't recall if we covered this later or not. Sometimes when you start taking those equity investments, you're giving up they're buying part of your company. And I have seen founders get very excited about getting a large check and then come to the realization that not only do they have a minority stake in their own company, it's a fractional stake in their own company. And I've seen then same sort of thing. Owner commitment will certainly decline very quickly after that when they recognize that they're just drawing a paycheck and this is no longer their vision.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the end goal, which like so many people I think realize kind of on a like philosophical level, but haven't really internalized, is that growth comes with more collaboration, right? So, I mean, just on a very basic level, you have a Series A, you're distributing preferred stock. Most of the time, you're giving the preferred stockholders a board seat, right? They're coming in with their own vision, their own ideas for what it's going to take to make this company great. And a lot of that can be super productive, I mean, it's great to have voices, brought to the table that come from a lot of experience, maybe who are able to fill some of those gaps that you're not able to fill. They have expertise in areas that you don't. But you also have to let go of the reins of the organization to some degree, and that can be a challenge. And so being really thoughtful about who you're bringing into your leadership, and that starts with who you're bringing onto your cap table is really critical. I mean, we could do like a whole other webinar for another time, and that's a different conversation about board composition and who you want on your board. But all to say, that should be a thoughtful decision. It should be one that you're making critically and carefully, and that you're thinking about both from the cap table perspective as well as the board governance perspective.
And when Ann and I were putting this presentation together, we sat on this slide for probably 15, 20 minutes and realized this could be an entire presentation. So if you do like what we're saying today and you want to hear more, give us a thumbs up. Tell us. We'd love to hear more about what this looks like. And Anna, to continue your thread there, how's the board compensated? Do they get shares? This is a paid. There's a fiduciary responsibility being a board member versus an advisory person. And, there's a lot of nuances in there, but an investor is going to want to know who is your team. And are they there to support you? Even now, I talk to companies and I see this great list of advisors and board members, but they're asking me basic questions. And I'm like, this is a board question. You need to go back to them and get guidance from them because it's their responsibility. You've given them something along those lines. And then Anna and I had a little bit of a conversation about should the founders and C-suite have their own capital committed to the startup or not. I've heard both sides of that coin. So we'd love to explore these topics in greater detail. So again, give us a thumbs up if you like this presentation.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, yeah, these are all things that people are thinking about. I mean, on the capital front, so much of it depends on what kind of capital is coming to the table, whether, as you said, like, if there has been a successful exit in the past, that can really, be a positive sign for investors, but they want to see that there's a shared skill set, between what was done before and what's being done now, or, some overlapping visions and priorities. So yeah, definitely a topic for another conversation. And Andrew, if you want to talk a little bit about evidence of demand, I know that you see this every day. Companies that are excited are moving forward with a big vision, but haven't really done the testing that's necessary to see whether there's the market. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So again, I deal with a lot of companies rolling out of an academic research institution, mostly in biotechnology, novel plant and protein production, or what have you. And in that environment, you're ensconced, you're protected, you're head down in the lab, you're proving that this thing that you've created or discovered works, and you've got a model here, and now you want to come out and make money off of this. There's a push in the university to commercialize, whatever that reason is that you want to get out there. I see company after company, and probably it's more the exception that they've done a competitive analysis of what the market actually is. Who else is out there that solved this problem, is working on this problem? Who are the big strategics, those multinational companies that have already got a program in place to address whatever this thing is? Because they could very easily be a partner. You can go through their corporate venture funds, or you could be a threat to them, and they're going to do everything possible to squash you. And when you're coming out of those research institutions, a lot of times you have those blinders on. I mean, again, this is your baby. It's perfect. It's ready to go. You can't believe that no one will listen to your story the way that you tell it, the way that you want to tell it, but not understanding what the entire market is accepting at this point in time. This could be we could do case study after case study after case study of all the folks I've seen come out. And they're in my mind, this is the fallacy of sunk cost. All right, you've already accepted all this non-dilutive money. You've proven this thing works. You're at this point, you've got millions of dollars or whatever that thing that's underneath your belt already. So you need to keep on plowing ahead regardless of what that market is, what the tension is that you're facing when you hit the marketplace. And this is where people like Anna and myself come in real handy, because we can give you a clear-eyed view of what it is from our perspective, and then plot those paths forward. Again, a strategic alliance or understanding your threat. How do you maneuver and stealth around that threat point to get to where you want to be? But Anna, thanks for allowing me to talk about that one, because that is, it's so simple. Go to chat, go to one of the AI agents and say, who are my competitors and how can I get around them? That would make our lives so much easier if we came to the table with that basic understanding.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I see that challenge arising, at the term sheet phase, that sometimes there's terms that have been plopped onto this term sheet, and nobody's totally committed to them because they're not really in line with market. It's not really reflective of what the demand is out there. And it's not until we get into the negotiation process of the actual, series documents that we realize, wait a minute, maybe some of those terms that were outlined on the term sheet, are not terms that the parties are both committed to. And then we run into a lot more challenges where, people feel like there's been commitments made that can't be upheld, and the relationship gets, tense. And I mean, I've seen deals fall because of it. So yeah, I mean, having a real understanding of what the value is of what you're putting forward before you even enter into that term sheet phase is so critical.
All right. So, I will probably preach until the day I'm dead that everyone needs a North Star or constellation of North Stars. Um, it is astounding to me how many businesses I see or endeavors that I see that have solved a problem, but really haven't clearly articulated what that mission to market's going to look like, and haven't not only told the outside, but told the inside teams what that North Star is. I do want to applaud a few folks I've talked to recently. I won't name their names, but they know who they are, that have gone through that process after I asked the question, what is that North Star? What is that one thing that's going to define you? Excuse me a sec. So it's clear, and it's going to be clear both in your collateral, your websites, your messaging. You want to get to the point where people who hear what you have done, what you've solved, can repeat that to someone else who has no idea about the marketplace, has no idea about the technology or service that you're providing. That will make everyone's life so much easier. Again, if you're going back to what we said before, if you're all things to everybody, awesome. Yeah, so is a life insurance agent. If you get a pulse, you can sign a piece of paper and get that. Tell me that you are a cybersecurity risk professional that has these types of policies and this type of thing. Now I know exactly where your target is. I know exactly what to bring you. So, it's the slide says itself. The more powerful or the more clear the concept, the more powerful the message is going to be.
Yeah, and I really like what you said about making sure that that North Star is translated to all of the stakeholders in the company. I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about before with making sure that the staff is invested, that this staff can be your best spokespeople for the company. And making sure that they're aligned on what the concept is, what the problem is, what the, ideal customer is, making sure that they understand that North Star. Part of it again is like in those conversations, it's built into the culture, and part of it is also in how you're documenting things, how you're shaping your policies. If you do have employment policies that make clear what your values are, those are really important to be sharing with your staff.
I agree. Oh, it's a good one, isn't it? I like this slide a lot. So, if you're listening to this, perhaps you're already on this process. You've gone down this journey. You have calculated your burn rate on your runway. So, do you have enough cash to go further? And what does that look like? So, investors are going to take a look at that as well. How much oxygen do you have in your tanks before you run out? And is it even appropriate to enter into the conversation about raising funds, or is that process 6 to 9 to 18 months going to be too long for the runway that you've got right now? Going back to the last slide, understanding what is that thing? What is that North Star? What is the reason for your existence? What is your reason to coming to market? That is what you're raising funds on. It's not going to be all the ancillary things that go along with it. You know, if you've already accepted non-dilutive money, and if you're rolling up an institution, you most likely have you met the required milestones that that grant has outlined in there? And can you defend those? And do those milestones matter in the fundraising round that you're going into right now? I see a lot of people that will say, I need to raise 25 million, and here's a pie chart on how that funds are going to be used. Okay, I guess that's better than nothing. But if I'm an investor and I'm putting down a large check into your company and becoming a part owner of this company, I want to know exactly how that money is being used. I won't say I need to go down to the fractional penny on these things, but I do want to have a really good layout of what you're going to use it for, and this is practical, or is this pie in the sky? Are you raising more money than you need to achieve that entry level point that you need to go into a market? What is your financial model, and can you defend it? Can you change it? Are you amenable to changing it? You've gotten this far as an entrepreneur. In order for you to go to the next stage, what are those milestones that have to be met, and how will this funding help that? If you can answer these questions before they're asked, you're going to look a lot better in the eyes of in the investment community. Um, and
Yeah.
oh, Anna, yeah, I'm just gonna say Anna, jump in there.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I want to hit again on a point that you made earlier on about what your outstanding obligations may be to your existing investors. I know for most people it's miserable to look at legal language and read those terms, but it's so essential. And do whatever, sit down with a good drink and some good music and pull out that contract. But it really just needs to be done because so often I have seen situations where it becomes a challenge down the road in a future fundraising round where you realize, okay, we have these outstanding obligations that we haven't met or that, will be implicated by this future funding. So, make sure that you're taking a look at that legal language. Um, I also wanted to ask Andrew, you and I work a lot with social enterprises, with companies that, have more than one bottom line that are also thinking about social benefit, environmental benefit, and they're working with investors who have the same priorities. I'm interested to hear from you, what that kind of purpose conversation looks like from between those companies and those investors.
Typically, it's easier because when you're talking to social impact investors and affiliated organizations, they have a specific reason for being. They have a specific mission in life, and if you align with that mission, you're going to get a favorable meeting with them. The really the benefit and beauty of social impact investors. Some foundations also fall under that umbrella, is that they're willing to make not only investments, but larger investments in those earlier rounds to see this thing that could be game changing for the world or help them meet whatever their mission is. And get in there. And the benefit there is once you're inside of that, they will do everything they can to support you, as well as from an investment community. Now we have some certainty. Now we see someone else has had that commitment, a hard commitment prior to the next round or next raise coming in. And now we know that we can then affiliate with them. Outside of the social impact investors, there are others out there in the private and corporate equity community that tend to have those layers or flavors along with their investment thesis that they will consider things in these areas, whether it's climate tech or, I'm in food and agriculture, different places like that. They're more forgiving to some of the things and more willing to work with folks. But going back to the corpus of what you and I have been talking about, the more detailed and precise you can be, the cleaner you can be, the easier and less friction there is in that process.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. I mean, a beautiful world-changing purpose only gets you so far. It can open up some doors, but if at the end of the day you don't have, the infrastructure there, the business infrastructure, the legal infrastructure there, it can only do so much. Um, yeah, and then sort of back to the conversation about team alignment. I know that you had a few other points here, about how to get the staff, how to get the founders on the same page, how to get, the board on the same page.
Yeah, and going back to our restaurant analogy, there are many companies out there that have too many cooks in the kitchen. Let's be clear about this. You've got a team of dedicated people that want to take this company somewhere, but there's not a whole lot of cash out there to bring support teams in there. And so it is this core team that's running the company, and they all probably have some share of equity, probably similar. And each one, even though there's a North Star, there's different ideas on how to get to that North Star. And a lot of those conversations, a lot of that time spent clarifying those things, those meetings that bog down the process, that burns into your runway. That burns into your capital that you currently have to get to launch so you can get airborne and make some money. So having not only the core team, but then the board itself, because you're looking at them for advisory, for resource opportunities, for open doors, things like that. As long as everyone knows what is that North Star, what is that next milestone that we all need to have our oars in the water and we're rowing towards consistently to get to that point in time, rather than being distracted or having some sort of, as Anna points out, a lot of times you bring in someone from your childhood, there's emotion there, or an old business partner, and that gets in the way. And sometimes it's a spousal emotion. It could be a drama thing that happens between families and now it's brought into where you are, and that will derail you. Especially again, going back to this early nascent period in your company's lifetime, it's a very fragile time until you get up and running to that point. So, just echo what we said before, keep everyone aligned to that North Star.
Yeah, 100%. The team really matters on every level. Um, so, just to kind of let's, pull it together all, at this point, what do you see as some of the biggest business red flags out there?
Well, and I've said this several times. You've heard it here. This is your baby. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, this thing you got, this is everything. This is going to solve the entire world's problems. And when you come to me and you tell me about your baby, I say, well, it's a beautiful baby, but someone else out there has a bigger child than you do, or that child does this thing better. Maybe you should think about that. And you bristle. And you say, no, they should understand that this is the thing that's going to be a huge red flag to me, or founders or other folks that approach me that don't take feedback well. And I'm going to be polite. I'm going to be like an investor. You don't take feedback well, great. I wish you a good day. It's not going to be a ongoing engagement. There needs to be that malleability. There needs to be that understanding. And I think to an entrepreneur that I was part of a venture studio, and we had an entrepreneur that came from outside industry into this new industry, and he told us, he goes, every time I pitch to you, I want you to tear it apart. I want you to tell me every single thing that I've done wrong, whether it's in the graphic representation, whether it's an answer I gave, whether it's how I said something or framed something. And over the 6 month period, it was brilliant. And we were brutal in giving that feedback, but at the end, the product was so precise, so perfect. And that is the massive exception to the rule. Being open, have humility when you're listening to this. Take that feedback, incorporate it, because the people you go to advice want what's best for you. They're not attacking you. They're telling you, hey, I'm on this side of things. This is the way I see the world, and this is how they're going to react when you come into it. The more prepared you are for that, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find this all the time. Nobody it's a pain in the butt to get on the phone with your attorney and have them tell you, oh, there's these holes in your IP portfolio, or, these potential employment challenges that, liabilities that you could be facing down the road. It's not fun to hear. But it is better to hear it from, somebody who's on your team, who's on your side before the stakes, have really arisen, and to just, deal with it then. It really can save you a lot of time and pain and money down the road.
And another thing, I don't know if we mentioned that on the onset, but we prepared a checklist, as well as we'll make this deck available after it's all over. And in the checklist, Anna did write something that made me just laugh out loud. Fortunately, I didn't have anything in my mouth when I did it. But does what you have in your deck, is it supported by fundamentals? Or are you just overreaching and promising the world, yet once we start diving in there, things look pretty squirrely. I have seen a lot of decks that have made grandiose claims, but once I ask a few basic questions, I realize that they're just reaching, that those are aspirational claims that are made in the deck, and maybe will be achieved with a raise or maybe not. But keep it real, keep it where you can defend and verifiable, keep it in the facts.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Yeah, I mean, for sure. I find all the time when I have clients who have come to me and they've done that critical, they've gone through the critical feedback phase, they've responded to the critical feedback phase, they've developed again, foundations that are stronger than their decks, or at least as strong as their decks. And they've already examined a lot of the holes. It saves me a lot of work, which means it saves my clients a lot of cost. And it means that the deals don't get stopped along the way, that there's already momentum, that there's already traction within the market, and it's a much smoother path to making that funding happen.
And a case in point, there's somebody right now who wants to engage me for my services. I already have two enormous offtake agreements that are warm and ready to go. I'm uncomfortable with some of their legal language. I'm uncomfortable with that piece of it, and I'm not going to expose my personal network to this company because there could be a liable blowback on me for making that introduction. Maybe it won't be monetary, but it's certainly reputational. But going to that point, and these are really basic things that need to be addressed. They're not expensive, but they need to be put to sleep before we move forward.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, thinking about it comprehensively, doing the business cleanup and doing the legal cleanup at the same time, having that synergy between, your activities, as you kind of position yourself for the market is really critical. And again, I mean, it can be a lot more efficient when it's done. The earlier in the process it's done, in the fewer potential liabilities you already have outstanding, the better. So preparing for a successful launch. So, now we've talked a lot about the doom and gloom, all of the worst case scenarios, but Andrew, share with us a little bit about how you get yourself on the best foot, how you bring the best people to the table from the get-go.
Well, for those of you, and Anna, I know you've worked in the restaurant business. I spent many years working in the restaurant business, and we had the pre-show, which is the launch before the launch, where we bring our friends and our families in, those people that we know and trust, to give us that honest feedback. Are we ready? And you've listened to Anna and I talk here. You've prepared yourself. You're good. You feel you're pretty solid and ready to go. Now is the time to invite your board, your advisors, their friends in for a private presentation. Here's what we got. What do you think? And oftentimes, they will become so enthralled, or they should become so enthralled, that they're willing to put some money behind you or some sort of resource and make that available to you based on this. And like we said before, listen to their feedback. They care about you. They're not there to disparage you. They want you to be successful, and that feedback they give you, incorporate that in there. You've also kind of laid the groundwork. Now you have access to their network. So as you begin to go out there in a more formal raise, there's more people out there that can spread the word, be advocates for you, and hopefully, again, your North Star is so concise, they can repeat your message to others who have no idea what you do or why you matter. But there's a lot of, make sure the linen's clean, make sure the silverware is clean. What else, Anna?
Oh man, totally. No, I mean, like making sure the kitchen looks good, right? I mean, making sure the back of the house is good to go, that everyone's there, that everything's in order. Yeah, I mean, doing that prep work is essential. And so then, once you've done that prep work, you feel good about things, you've poked all the holes, you've patched them all up, you've polished the silver, you've put out the linens. Um, let's chat through a little bit. What are your first things to do? As you're sitting down, okay, we're ready to fundraise, we're starting to have conversations, the conversations are going well. Just to kind of recap some of the things that we've talked about from a legal perspective, I'd say, three really essential things that you want to be doing. The first is, again, developing those website terms, making sure that they're clean, they're compliant, that they apply to the actual practices of the company, that you're not committing to things within your website terms that you can't actually maintain, that you don't have internal systems for. Making sure those look good to go, and again, that they apply to the situation, that you're if whatever jurisdiction's being implicated by the work that you're doing, that the terms that you have are compliant with that jurisdiction. um, I'd say the second thing is, really cleaning up that cap table, cleaning up that data room, getting it within a software that you enjoy working with, and making sure that you have, again, internal systems for how you maintain that, how you update it, how you get, the necessary approvals to allocate stock, to sign agreements, and making sure that everything's well documented and consolidated. And then I'd say the third thing is, making sure that that property, that intellectual property is properly assigned, making sure that it is in the hands of the company, that you've, figured out what the limitations are, that you have plans to mitigate those limitations, that you're aware of, what stakeholders within your company hold intellectual property. They're aware of what their obligations are with regards to keeping that intellectual property in the hands of the customer of the company, so that when you are bringing investors in, they feel some security about, the product that they're buying. They know that the intellectual property is going to be there in the long term and supporting, their equity. So, those are the three things. If you do nothing else from a legal perspective, make sure you're doing those things. And Andrew, what do you think? From a business perspective, what are the key things there?
Well, I'm going to throw you an amen on the cap table and data room because when I see someone coming to me that has a clear understanding, they look good, even if they're new, I'm like, okay, that's impressive. You really have done your homework. I have a higher degree of confidence in what you are. Many times people will come to me and say, no, we don't have a data room yet. Or, my cap table's kind of messy. I've got all this and that in there. And for me, that going back to a red flag slide. Now I'm like, okay, is this going to be work to clean this up, to build this thing out, to understand what those needs are, or is this something you can do yourselves? A few things just to recap. If you're going for your raise, be very specific on what that size of raise is, what it's going to be used for. You might even want to start mapping out, okay, let's say this raise comes in, all the milestones are met, then what? Is there another raise at that point in time? Can we run off revenues? Do we do debt financing? How do we repay that money that's in there if that's the question's going to be? But the clearer you are right now in imagining what that future looks like, the better. I love to see traction. So, in traction, it could be revenue, but it also could be a letter of intent, a provisional purchase order, a purchase order of some sort. From an investor side of things, those give us comfort. And the more that it's a recognizable name on that PO, the happier we are at that point in time. So even though you might say, well, listen, they give me a PO, but I don't make any money yet. well, that's going to weigh in your favor as we're looking at it from an investment standpoint. And again, foundational, make sure that everyone in your leadership team and organization can repeat your message succinctly in one sentence, maybe two, and someone else can repeat it back to them and understand what that thing means. If it takes you paragraphs to tell people what your science is, how it works, you're probably going to lose them at word number four at that point in time. And we did get a question, Anna. Well, actually, are we at the end yet? We can keep on going, then I'll let you go.
We're
I wasn't
almost
watching the
there.
slides.
Yeah, we're almost there. But I
We'll
mean,
answer the questions at the end.
yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I just really, your second point about validating early traction, that really comes up when you start to bring on institutional investors. They want to see that, you've already sold this to your friends, to your family, that there's people, there's a lot of other considerations there too about how you do those family and friends rounds, but they want to see that there's people who've already put down the little bit of money that they have, to invest in this vision. So, getting that traction from a fundraising perspective as well is critical. Yeah, so I mean, we're pretty much at the end here. I think we can start to bring on some questions. We want to get those investors a seat at the table. We want to get them chatting and we want to, make sure that they enjoy their meal. So, share with us, please, if you've got any stories, good or bad from situations in which you've tried to bring investors to the table, whether they've stuck around, whether they've headed out. We're interested in hearing those stories. Please anonymize them so that, we're not violating any NDAs here, but excited to jump into conversation and hear any stories that are out there.
Good. And Anna, again, I want to thank you for being the guinea pig here to allow us to do this pilot presentation and preparing all this too. I'm on stage with you, but you did all the work. I'm just kind of, piping in from time to time. So I thank you for doing that and taking this on. One of the questions we got, I think, is an interesting one, is what is the role of aspirational vision within a pitch deck? Is that appropriate to have that in there at this point in time? I certainly have some thoughts on that, but Anna, how would you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. You want to see that, people want to see your long-term vision. They want to see that you're in this from for the long term. I mean, it goes back to the owner investment, the founder investment. They want to see that this is not just sort of a one-off project or, a short-term project for you. Um, and I think, investors are aware that there's challenges. Investors want you to be upfront about your challenges. They want to know, that these are the grand visions you have for the future, that you may not be there, you may not have all of the resources in your pocket yet to achieve those goals, but you're keeping them in mind. And again, it goes back to like really making sure that you have solid people who are in there for the long run, making sure you have, employment agreements with those people, that those people have assigned their intellectual property, that those people have equity, that they've vesting terms attached to that equity, and that they're there to carry out that long-term vision. So you have not only kind of the theoretical side of it, but you have the mechanisms in place to realize that vision. But what are your thoughts, Andrew? I know you spend a lot of time thinking about these things.
I have, and I'm going to take a little bit different tact on this one because when I do see aspirational wording or visions within a pitch deck, I do worry a little about the shiny object syndrome. That maybe, for you to hit this thing is you're going to be distracted in five different ways until you circumvent the other things to get there. And do you have the appropriate amount of capital to get you down the runway to achieve whatever those things are at that point in time? And I also would counsel folks, aspirational message, everything Anna said, yes. Make sure that whatever that aspirational message is not based on total addressable market. I don't want to hear there's $50 billion worth of whatever out there. Great. So what piece are you realistically going to go after? It's not the 50 billion. I'm going to guarantee you that because there will always be competitors when there's revenue or money to be made out there. The more realistic your aspirations can be, the better off that I think you're going to be in the long run. And to Anna's point, I do like to see that vision. I'd like to see that thinking ahead. Milestones being hit. Okay, these milestones get hit in a reasonable amount of time with a reasonable amount of effort. Great. Now we can conveniently think, okay, you might hit those aspirational goals or you will hit those aspirational goals.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. It's a great one.
And Anna, I think we had a couple questions that we had thought of as well to get things
Mhm.
rolling here. Do you want to jump in there? I'm going to check and see if there's others out there.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm interested to hear from you, Andrew. Really early st stage, a founder comes to you, they say, we have this great idea. This is the grand vision. Again, these are our long-term aspirations. What are the big things that you're looking at to make a determination about whether they're in fact fundable, whether there are going to be investors sitting down at the table?
Yeah, I'm going to give a sort of a flippant answer to that, but it's a true answer. When I'm looking at any kind of thing for the new first time, I look at the leadership team. Is this an A plus leadership team? Because I will bet on an A plus leadership team with a B minus idea or a B minus company because I know that they'll be successful. If I see an A plus company with a B or a C leadership team, which, it's maybe 50-50 out there, that for me is a huge red flag. And going back to humility, taking feedback, doing things the right way, not burning bridges, all the little things we discussed that are in there at that point in time. But that's the first thing I'm going to look at. And now, knowing you, I'm also going to see, do they have a privacy policy, and do they have a legal terms in their website? Those are for me that now I have some really easy red flags to look for. And if the red flags start accumulating, that's an issue because, as you and I know, little red flags turn into big red flags later on.
Yeah. Yeah, and even lawsuits, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think that team is critical. I mean, particularly when you're dealing with market uncertainty, you're dealing with political uncertainty, you're dealing with unknowns, having, people who are really strong, who can pivot, who are flexible, who are, able to be agile in response to significant changes out there, is really in some ways more important than the product itself. Um, you know, uh, and I'm also interested to hear, you talked a little bit about being specific about how you're going to put funding to use, how you're going to convert the investment from a round into outcomes. How specific do you need to be? I mean, are you talking about like we're going to spend X amount on pencils and we're going to spend Y amount on post-it notes? Or is it kind of bigger picture there?
Well, I mean, I want to see an Excel spreadsheet or something similar. I just don't want to see a pie chart with colors in it. I need to see more specifically what is this going to look like? What's the long-term impact? And if you've really done your homework, the tables will flow into each other. And sort of adjacent to that question, there's a company I'm looking at right now. I'm very interested in. I'm tracking them. They made significant gains in one area, but the CEO realized even though all the money we've raised so far, the staff that we have, the discoveries that we had, the result, the marketplace is not big enough for us at this point in time. And there's a completely different marketplace that I think we can cross apply what we got here into. And as somebody from the outside who understands the market, I'm really excited about what they're going to do. And it's so whatever funds were committed to that first North Star, that's awesome. But I think that the investors, and from what I've been told, the investors are very happy about this new pivot and this new direction. It is a different use of funds. Now, that said, that's not for everybody. That's the exception. I don't think you should go out there and raise a lot of money and then decide to pivot immediately once the check hits the bank. The investors are going to want to see you agree to the terms that are in the term sheet and all the other things like that.
Yeah, 100%. And, I'll say like also kind of on the social enterprise side of things, sometimes products need to change. There may be subsidization infrastructure that existed at one point under one administration that no longer exists. And companies need to be able to make that pivot. But having, some sort of core principles that remain the same, making sure that, you have this people, same people there, from the beginning, that you have a unified vision, that you have, that vision being translated across stakeholders, is really key. Um, and oh, sorry.
Well, I was going to say we've got a few questions here, but
Okay.
there's one here that I think is more adept or more focused on you. From an investor standpoint, what is one thing on the cap table that can, quietly, because sometimes we don't tell people why we're backing away, but what are some of those things that stand out to you that will either slow down or derail a deal?
Yeah. I mean, it's a balancing act like all things, but I have seen situations where there's just too many people on the cap table, before you're going to institutional investors that there's equity handed out to your next door neighbor and your pet sitter and everyone you've ever met. And then, often there isn't a lot of organization when it comes to that distribution that, there isn't the necessary protocols haven't been taken to make sure that equity gets out. You maybe don't have, appropriate board approvals. And then you've got all these people on your cap table, and it's not really clear what their role is. I mean, there's some votes that are going before a stake, that do require shareholders to weigh in. And if your next door neighbor is going to be a part of some really critical decision for the company down the road, that's going to, cause some investors' heads, some investors to scratch their heads. So I see that as a real challenge for some organizations. Of course, again, you want to have momentum, you want to have traction, you want to have a lot of people who are interested and invested in your company, but there's an extreme to that.
Amen. I didn't see any more questions on the LinkedIn, but we do have one here that you have kindly prepared for me, so I'll take that one, Anna. And how is it, and this is a good one to end on. So let's say that you're sitting out there listening to this as an entrepreneur and you're thinking, oh, geez, I got four more things to do, before I can call Anna, Andrew, that I really need to have done right now. And your heart's racing and you're thinking about these things. You might even be turning this off and rushing out to do that thing. That tells me you're a little bit too early for a raise. Now if you listen to this and you've gone along, you're like, got that, got that, got that. Love this. Perfect. Excellent. This is exactly in alignment with what I got. Yeah, you're probably getting pretty close to being ready for a raise, and you can reach out to Anna and myself, and we'd be happy to chat with you and discuss your situation and see what it looks like from our perspective at that point in time. But I see a lot of people out there that they've been burning that capital, that runway's getting short. They're not sure if they're going to lift off. They get more and more desperate. When I Anna, one of the red flags I look to as well, and this is more on the Andrew side, is am I the last straw? Have they come to me after exhausting everything else, knowing that I'm their last straw to get there? Because now they're in a desperate situation. They don't have the capital they need to effectively run their organization or prepare for what comes next. They're emotionally distraught. And it's hard. Those are really hard conversations to enter into, but don't put yourself in that position. Watch this, listen to what we say, share it with your friends, make sure the community is more informed as well. But Anna, again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to prepare this and sit in as the guinea pig for this first pilot episode.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Andrew. This was your vision, and we were just sort of chatting about this all informally, and you had the idea. Let's actually put some of our thoughts into action and have a conversation with those who are out there. So thank you so much for bearing with the technical hiccups that come with a foray into a new technological world. And yeah, I'm excited to keep this conversation going with folks. Please stay in touch. We will follow up with you, as I said, with that checklist, with these slides. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'll also get any messages across to Andrew. If you've got further questions about this, you want to sit down and sort of explore some of the things that we've chatted about today. But yeah, please share this information. The better informed founders can be about these issues, the easier it makes our work. So, we're always happy to see that.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Anna. You guys have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.